Welcome, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
They're slowly rolling in.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to drop this in the chat. But I'll also say you are all automatically muted, just so you know. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Swenson Center's Nordic Book Club for August. This month is extra special because we have the author joining us to tell us a little bit about his book, A Drop of Midnight. Hopefully you've all had a chance to get it. So we're gonna hear from Jason a bit, and then we're going to have a bit of a Q&A. So as you think of questions along the way, feel free to drop them in the chat, or if you'd like to be able to ask your question live, you'll be able to raise your hand during Q&A, and I can click on you and unmute you. And I think the way to raise your hand is down at the bottom where it says participants. You can click on that and have a hand raise option. So I will just, by way of introduction, Jason Timbuktu Diakité is one of Sweden's most well-known hip-hop artists. Born in Sweden to American parents, an African-American dad and a white mom. He has released 8 solo albums and numerous singles, the majority of which have reached gold or platinum status. His accolades include 8 Swedish Grammy Awards and 4 P3 Gold Swedish Radio Awards. He has performed all over the world, from Africa to Svalbard, from the Apollo in New York City to the Roxy in Los Angeles, and to the Polar Music Prize and Nobel Peace Prize award ceremonies. The book was written in 2016 and then translated into English by Rachel Wilson-Broyles in 2020. So thank you for joining us, Jason. I'll let you take it away from here.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. And thank you, everybody, for coming out or logging on. Scanning the room here and seeing, I thought, Autumn Multan. I see a couple of like Swedish sounding. Helen Leaf could also be an Americanization of Helen Love, for example, Dag Blank. So happy to see some American Swedes in the audience today too. Just like Lisa said, my name is Jason. I was born in Sweden. Father and a white American mom. They moved here in 1969 as my dad couldn't afford a college education in the United States. He was born and grew up in Harlem, and by chance found out that he could study for free in Sweden. And at the time, Sweden would allow you to get a totally free, 100% free university education. No matter where in the world you were coming from. Their plan was to stay a few years. They're still here to this day. So they've spent 50 plus years in Sweden. I was born and grew up here in a time where Sweden, I was born in 1975, in a time where Sweden really was the social democratic utopia that it still has the kind of global image of being. It was a very egalitarian society, but also a very homogenous society. I'd say both ethnically, culturally, very homogenous. I, as a small boy starting school, realized that my difference in skin color really separated me from my school friends. I kind of, in a sense, discovered my otherness by looking around myself at my school and being one of only 3 kids of color at the entire school for many years. This was the start of my identity crisis. In a sense, that identity crisis is still going on. But at a point a few years ago, I realized that I had spent my life describing myself as half Swedish, half American, half Black, half white. There's very little completion in that self-narrative. It's just a bunch of half. And for some reason, I just realized that if I instead describe myself as being both Swedish and American, Black and white, just that semantic flip changed, in a sense, how I looked at myself. So instead of feeling culturally or poor in heritage, I felt richer, and something magical happened. And that was really the mental beginning of this book, A Drop of Midnight, which is kind of an investigation into how I came to that conclusion and how that identity crisis played out. Also, like Lisa said, I have spent most of my life, since I was 14, writing rap, performing and singing. So I've lived my life working as an artist. And this identity crisis has, in a sense, served me very well. It's been an unending source of inspiration, of material to write about and sing about and rap about. And other than my personal reasons to write down my story and my family's story, I wanted to describe to Swedish readers how somebody looking like myself could walk around speaking in a Scanian, which is the southern Swedish accent of Swedish, and call themselves Swedes and be so culturally Swedish, as I also am. I wanted to tell the story of how a family looking like mine ends up in a place like Sweden. And it has enriched Sweden culturally. Also, I wanted to, my main reason to write the book was for the next generation. At the time, I didn't have any children, but was hoping to one day become a parent, in which I now am, and hoping that that child, when asking themselves the same questions that I so often asked as a child, as a teenager, and as a young man, where do I belong? Who are my people? Where is home? That this book could be a roadmap for them. But also, and on a macro level, there are truly only a handful or two handfuls of Afro-Swedish people who have even written books in Sweden about the Black experience in Sweden. And I wanted to add that kind of meager canon and contribute that to the Swedish culture. And I'm very happy that the book is now translated into English, and it puts a whole different spin on the story as far as, well, what does this book mean to Americans? In essence, this is a very American story. My parents are both American. My ancestors and my family are all, well, you know, either in America or spent their time in the United States. So it's an American book, or it's an American story that kind of boomerangs to Sweden and then comes back to America, hoping that it also maybe offers a fresh perspective on a very old and to this day very painful part of you know, American culture and history. Yeah, so that's A Drop of Midnight. I thought I'd read, I think I'll read two passages for you guys. So the first passage is at the beginning of the book. I spent my entire upbringing in the southern Swedish city of Lund, searching for an answer, an unambiguous, coherent image of who I was. I wished for white skin, a people, an origin, a collective narrative and a history, a homeland. Where was I supposed to start? As I created my identity, it became a patchwork quilt, a mosaic of irregular shards and pieces that I meticulously tried to meld together into Diakite, American, never Swedish, never white, but never Black either. I was a no man's land in the world. I have a complex system of roots that branches across continents, ethnicities, classes, colors, and eras. I am Jason, son of the Black Matabuco Diakite and the white Elaine Bozak. I am all the countries my forefathers came from and were shipped to in chains. I am all the colors and shades of their skin. I am their rage and their longing, their hardships, successes, and their dreams. I'm the intersection of Slovakia, Germany, France, Africa, South Carolina, of white, black, and Cherokee. I'm the meeting of Bozak, Schneidmüller, Hauser, Privat, Robinson, Davis, and Miller. The sum of mom's Slavic German roots and dad's African ones, molded in the social democracy of Sweden. Must I have just one home? One origin? Is that to make it easier for those around me, or to flat out appease them? To make it simpler for them to put a label on me, measure me, place me, fence me in, and judge me? Is that why I've spent so much time tormenting myself with these questions of identity? So I can give a simple answer when someone asks where I come from. Maybe it's human nature to want clear answers. Obvious boundaries between good and evil, light and dark, right and wrong, friend and enemy, us and them. As if humans cannot exist otherwise. Can't I have many origins, identities, homes? I believed for a long time that I didn't have a choice because that was just how the world and people worked. I imagined that if you were Swedish, you were white, the same as if you came from Scranton, Pennsylvania, like my mother. But if you were from Harlem, you were black, like dad and his family. Figure shit was hurled after me time and again on the playground in elementary school. My uncle shouts, "Hey, Puerto Rico," every time we meet. I'm often asked if I'm from Morocco, Thailand, India, Ecuador, Cuba, or Ethiopia. "Jason, isn't that Arabic for Jesus?" asked one middle-aged man in the small Swedish town of Hallösa. My name signals to Swedes that I am something different, that I'm not one of us. Diakite, what kind of name is that? Asked a cashier at a department store in New York. Only she pronounced it like the architect. Diakite comes from the Fula people, or Fulani, as they're also called, I responded, glad that she was curious. The name is as common in Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, the Gambia, and Nigeria as Williams or Jones are in the US. The cashier just shrugged. All those hours I spent as 9-year-old staring at white flecks on the back of my right hand, thinking that maybe there was something white under my brown skin. Maybe the white spots would grow and make me into who I wanted to be, white. I also remember the contagious beats of hip hop and the cocky pride in having black skin, Public Enemies and Boogie Down Productions, powerful messages of standing up against the system and being proud of who you are and where you're from. Then I'd like to dive into just about the middle of the book, where I'm on my way to the small town of Allendale in the inland of South Carolina, where my grandfather, Solomon Warren Robinson, was born in 1907. My mind is reeling when Sima suddenly gives a shout. Stop the car. Before the wheels have stopped turning, he's dashing through the ditch and into a sea of white clouds to the right of our gray Hyundai. Now my eyes to take in the whole scene. It's like I've stepped out of a time machine, as if the bloody past of South Carolina never ceased, but continues to flourish in the form of small white tufts of cotton in endless fields. Was this where my forefathers slaved? Did their calloused hands harvest this very field? We have to film this, Sima cries, sweeping his hand to encompass the wide expanses. The cotton is high. The white bowls sit on their brown branches among green leaves and half-dried grayish-brown ones. I assume it will be time for harvest soon. I am my father's and grandfather's son, so I've got a pair of handmade, shiny British leather shoes on my feet. As gingerly as I can, I walk through the muddy ditch and to the field. In my hand, I hold an empty paper bag that a little earlier had been filled with snacks from the last day. I gently pick one tuft. The cotton rests in a hard brown crown-shaped shell, like a flower that is dried out and split, offering up its white inside. To get the cotton out, I have to stick my fingers in a little and tug. It's so soft. If it weren't for the seeds and the fluff, you could have used the cotton straight away. In my grandfather's day, 100 pounds of cotton would bring you about 50 cents. A really good picker could pick 3 or 4 times their weight in cotton, but 100 pounds was the average. It takes about 70 bowls like the one I just picked to make a pound. So Grandpa and his fellow pickers had to pick around 7,000 bowls a day. I think I'll stop there.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Now I know folks have questions, and we've already gotten one in the chat, if you don't mind. Steph asks, in the section about your Stockholm colleagues, you said it was either serendipity or fate that they were to embark on a tour of the southeastern US. The book is full of these interesting events. When you found out that your grandfather was buried near Malcolm X, or when you found out Roy C. Hammond in Allendale, you found Roy C. Hammond in Allendale. So looking back, was it all fate or serendipity?
Very good question, Steph. And thank you for having read the book, which you obviously have. Thank you. I would say a little bit of both, maybe. At the time, it really felt like fate. I mean, especially, there was something magical about meeting. So I go to Allendale. So this passage that I just read to you is when we're on the out Allendale, and the first time in my life I see a cotton field. And then we enter into Allendale, and we meet this man who runs one of the only stores in town, this man, Roy C. Hammond. And it turns out that Roy C. Hammond produced a track called Impeach the President, which came out in 1973. This became a huge hit. He produced and wrote the song for a band called the Honey Drippers. I'll really try to make this short. And of course, this is right at the, the dying days of Nixon, or the dying days of the Nixon presidency, his impending impeachment. And this song starts with just the drums, something to that effect. Those drums are one of the most recognizable breaks or samples all of pop. It's like a foundational piece of hip hop culture and how hip hop music sounds, is that song. And to me, who has wholeheartedly dedicated my life to hip hop culture for such a long time, it truly felt, I'd say serendipitous actually, to have met one of the architects of that culture when looking for answers about my grandfather in this godforsaken village or town of Allendale, South Carolina, which to this day remains very impoverished, very bereft of hope. And it was truly an awakening for me to see that side of the United States. I've visited and lived in the United States, but mostly along the, I haven't traveled inland and not into the South until researching my book. So yeah, there were a lot of serendipitous events and some maybe fateful ones, and a lot of kind of revelatory moments in writing the book. I like to think that once you start pulling on a thread and start to unravel it, that somehow once the universe knows you're serious, it's going to help you out along the way. And the more kind of love and effort and kind of true intent you put in it, something is going to open up. At least it helps me with remaining hopeful in a world where that's not always a given. But in the process of, that was what made writing the book such a pleasure, really, to spend this time investigating things of such a personal nature, and also spending so much time thinking about my parents, imagining how they must have felt, who they were before they became my parents, which they obviously have been all of my life. And even further back than that, my grandparents, and then into that kind of hazy distance of my ancestry. And truly carrying with myself, it truly gave me that feeling of how my life and the privilege I was born into in this country rests on the shoulders of all that courage and resilience and just ability to survive. Anyway.
Great. Well, I have a question. This book talks a lot about your relationship with your father, so I have to ask if he's read the book and what his reaction is to it.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Now, I had a first draft of the book in July 2016, and it was set to go to the printer in September. So I was like, I had 6 weeks of grueling editing ahead of me. And I figured that I may as well send a copy of the book to my mom and dad, because I'd been telling them continuously while writing it. I spent about 18 months writing the book. They never really asked me any follow-up questions on it. I knew my dad was very much against me writing about the family's business, and his business in particular, and what he considered private matters, and putting that out in the open. To do it anyway. So I think they were both very surprised when all of a sudden this book pops up in their email inboxes. And then I didn't hear anything from them for about 2 weeks. And as the editing process kept on going, I was like, God, they have to read it before, I send it to the printers. I've written as honestly, but also as lovingly as I can about them and myself and our family, and how my perspective on that. I really need for them to weigh in and, kind of give me a sign off on it, in a sense. And I was speaking to my partner about it, and I was really like frustrated. Like, why haven't they, I spent this time writing a whole book. Can't they just, read it? And my partner said, well, have you told them it's important to they read it? I said, I haven't phrased it in those exact words. So I called them up, told them it's important for me that you read the book. My dad's like, okay, if it's that important to you, then I'll read it, And my mom was like, really, I can't do it today. And, Thursday I have to go out with my bicycle club. And then on Friday I have this dinner. Like, all right, just, fit it in when you can. But at some point, please read the book. 4 hours later, and they're like a hive mind too. 4 hours later, my mom calls in tears. She's like, I couldn't, I had to start reading it. And I'm on chapter 5, and Jason, I love you so. And I really wish I could have protected you from the experiences you had as a child in school and so forth. I'm like, it's okay, Mom, it's okay. That's kind of all water under the bridge. That's also why I'm writing this book, for it truly to be water under the bridge. Much for reading. 5 minutes later, my dad calls. He's like, I've read your book. I'm like, wow, Mom is a fast reader, and a very voracious one. And she's only at like chapter 5 or 6. And you've read the entire book? Yes. And I'll send you my comments tomorrow. Click. And then the day after, I received a 3-page Word document with bullet points of all the stuff that he figured that he felt were incorrect or insensitive, or just like, that he needed to be taken out of the book. That was kind of the start of a long, or the continuation or the intensifying of a long conflict between my father and I. He claims to have read the Swedish book 3 times, and each time weighing in with new comments about, what he felt was so wrong about it. I gave him a copy of the English book. Now, my father is lived 50 plus years in Sweden, Swedish is not great. In Sweden, most people are very proficient in English. And so, and especially in the late 60s and 70s when he came, like everybody wanted to practice their English. So he could pretty much get by on speaking English, which you can to this day in Sweden. I gave him the book in English a couple of months ago, and he read it, and it was a whole different reaction. You know, I could feel like he truly could take in the, you know, from having seen this as a very harsh judgment on his fatherhood, he could see the love that I kept telling him what had kind of guided my pen in writing it. And my mom's like, but you said you read the book 3 times in Swedish. He's like, yeah, but I never really, you know, I never really read it. So finally he admitted. So now we've kind of landed in a good place, but there's some ethical questions in who owns a story and who does a story belong to, that I was very adamant with my father that I didn't want to take things out of the book. I took a few things out. Like one of the first things he commented on was that I had described his car as a heap of junk. And he was like, I never drove any car. You know, I may have driven old cars, you know, but I never drove any heap of junk. I always took excellent care of all my cars. He cares a lot about cars. But another thing that was of a more sensitive nature was the stories about when he was hospitalized and dying, and how at one point I had to acute sepsis, a blood poisoning that almost killed him, and that led to further complications that again he almost passed from. And at one point when we're in the emergency room, and he thinks he's at Harlem Hospital, he's telling me, how it's so strange that there are all these white people in Harlem Hospital. And I'm like, okay, Dad is really out of it. But he needed to go to the bathroom, and I had to help him go to the bathroom and do number 2. And now that I'm a father, that's not as a big a deal anymore. But it was just a very, very tragic and strong moment for me to see my father so helpless and so weakened. And I, of course, had to write about that. This is one of the most intense and sad moments of my life. My dad, of course, wanted me to leave that out of the book because he felt it was very revealing and private. And I was quite adamant with him. I reworded a few things, but kept the story in there. I was like, I have to. This is one of the most significant things to happen to me in the course of writing the book. I have to write about it. And he was, of course, saying, well, I don't want my friends and colleagues writing about me and in a situation like that, a situation that I can't even remember, and so forth. And now looking back at it, I can see kind of not just the ethical, but maybe the moral dilemma there. That, of course, his helplessness and illness was a part of my story, but it's also very much a part of his story. So where to draw that boundary is something that I've since gained more of an understanding of where my dad was coming from with wanting me to leave that out of the book.
Mm-hmm. Great. We've had some more questions come.
Yes, I see that. Should I just run them off?
Yeah, or skip around.
Steph Rance, again, asking, you speak a lot about genetic memory, and this is really interesting. Interestingly enough, many American contestants on Allt för Sverige. This is, for those who don't know, does everybody know what Allt för Sverige is? Some of you know. It's a Swedish TV show of Americans with Swedish heritage who come to Sweden to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steph, to find, well, I guess some answers about their heritage, or to experience the kind of land of their forebears. many American tests of the same thing about Sweden. Can you expound more on genetic memory? Any chance with the second book about your mother's ancestry? The question about my mother's ancestry is really interesting. My mom's family migrated from my mother's mother. His family are German and French. There's actually a family tree dating back to the 1600s. So it's very well documented in the German tradition of organization. And on my mother's father, so my maternal grandfather's side, my great-grandfather migrated from Slovakia, excuse me, and came as a 16-year-old to New York City in 1886. So yeah, I grappled how to work my family, my mother's family, into the book without the book becoming too long. The first rough edit of the script was 500 pages, and my editor was like, "No way, this is going to be whittled down." And I'm like, "I don't see how we're going to do it. I don't see how we're going to take a single page out of this. I've really, I've gone through it. I've taken out everything I can imagine." And then began the grueling editing process of him helping me kill my darlings. But yeah, I don't know if I'll write a second book strictly about my mother's ancestry, but other aspects of what my mother has meant to me. As I was raised by a Black father and a white mother, and that's a significant thing, actually. As opposed to a lot of other Black and people of colors around the world, I have a very, I have a very, a clear sense of, and I actually have white people who have shown me love and who I trust and have grown up with that, whereas a lot of people on my father's side, my African-American family, do not have that trust and have never had such a relationship with a person with white skin. So there's automatically the gap is wider. Whereas I see myself as this kind of bridge between Black and white. I mean, I straddled that as a child and as a teenager, with my father constantly telling me, you're Black, this is what you do to survive. And my mother just saying, you're a person and I love you just the way you are. I never let anyone put you down. And just kind of those not always opposing, but very different experiences. My parents also got divorced when I was very, very young. So my mom's house was one experience and my father's house another. But genetic memory is interesting. The passage I wrote that I read just on the cotton field was actually what got me to explore more about genetic memory. Now I call it a genetic phone call, because I felt at that moment, and which I go on to describe further, I don't know how to describe it, but I felt a very strong connection to my ancestors. People I barely know the names of. On my father's side, we can only go back to Jack and Mila Miller, who lived in the 1860s, or who were born in the 1860s. Further back than that, there's really no trace of exactly who. I mean, I've found some people that may have been family, but people have very generic names like Miller and Davis, and there were, thousands of Jack Millers. Yeah, so it's standing on the cotton field, I felt that very strong connection to my ancestry and my ancestors. And I think for a slight moment felt that I could feel them and what they felt. I obviously read a lot in that situation, but I do believe in the concept of genetic memory, that I'm also carrying with me the physical and maybe also psychological some of experiences that my forebears had in some sense. It's not scientifical at all, but it's something I still strongly believe in or want to believe in. Okay, let me jump to Kyle Jansson here. Do you feel everything came through in the translation? That's a really good question. So Rachel Wilson Broyles, who's American, but speaks fluent Swedish and is an avid translator and a fantastic translator of Swedish books and language, has done an amazing job. At the outset, when I had just completed the Swedish book, I figured, okay, let me just get busy with translating this myself to English so that I can pass it on to my family and they can read it. And a dear and wise friend of mine said, don't do it. You'll be mired in it for, forever. You'll rewrite the whole thing. You'll just, it'll be walking up that mountain all over again. Find somebody else to do it. And luckily I found Rachel, but I must say it is a very different book because the voices are different, and the choice of words are slightly different than maybe how I would have chosen them. This A Drop of Midnight is also translated to Norwegian. Now, I've read about the Norwegian, because to me it makes no sense at all that my people, my family sound like Norwegians. So it was just, I couldn't even go there. So something definitely happens in translation. But figuring that the English speaking readers who read it are reading it for the first time, they don't know that. So, and all the translated books that I've read, and so many of which I've loved, I really wanted to give people a chance or give my family story a chance to reach a wider circuit of readers, basically. But having said that, in Swedish, I wrote the book in Swedish, but I'm having a lot of conversations with my dad, my mom, my father's friends, my relatives, and those conversations are all done in English. So there's a lot of English in the Swedish version of the book, partly to illustrate how my family and my family's friends sound, but also to really give them their true character, and also because I could assume that the Swedish reader would understand the English. And then there are certain kind of untranslatables, like an English yeah or an English all right. It just doesn't, it's not the same in Swedish. It doesn't capture it, when my father's friend Don says all right, it's no way to capture that in the Swedish language. So what Rachel actually did was take a lot of that English, translated it into Swedish, and then back to English to get a kind of clean translation from start to finish. So it's really jumped back and forth between the language a lot. I have a question from Susan Sonye. Maybe she's already left. She said, I must leave, but I want to say that you're a gifted writer. Thank you. And I found the book compelling. Thank you for sharing this afternoon. Okay. Another question from Steph. This book was written before the George Floyd riots. How was the murder received in Sweden? Your cousin Olivia has a negative reaction to the protests. Has the death of Floyd changed her opinion about the protests? Is your uncle still going to vote for Trump? So my uncle, my paternal uncle, Uncle Obadike, is a hardcore Trump supporter. He was doing a lot of volunteer work for Trump's initial successful candidacy to become the president, the 45th president. And he is still, I would say, even more a diehard Trump supporter. So we actually don't speak that often, because for the past couple of years, I just have avoided talking politics with my uncle. I love him. We don't speak that often. He's got 4 kids. I know they're on his case all the time about this and questioning him, so I don't have to be the one. But nowadays, you know, he rarely there's a call when he's not talking about, you know, how awful things are for his beloved president and so forth. So it's really a my uncle's kind of opinions and political leanings have really taken an unexpected turn, I would say. He was a Democrat for 42 years, and finally he'd had it, and then he decided Trump is his man, and then from that day, he's just dug deeper and deeper into the trench of that opinion, to the point where there's an utter blindness. I asked him, is there anything that you feel, you know, like, I was elated when Obama was voted to be the 44th president, you know, a guy with a black dad and a white mom like myself, who listened to a lot of the same music that I listened to. I mean, truly, he was my president. But even so, I have lots of things that I'm critical about his presidency. You know, some things he did well and other things he didn't do well. You know, kind of a normal opinion you'd have of people in the public spheres. And it was like, Uncle, is there anything that you feel that Trump has like been not so successful with, or that he was wrong about, or that he was? He's like, no, nothing. So there is. This is a whole other conversation, but when people bet on a horse like, you know, the 45th president, and we really shouldn't say his name as often as we do, something happens with their minds, you know, that I think, I mean, I see it a lot with people who in Sweden, we have, you know, an alt-right party, the Sweden Democrats, and it's the same kind of entrenchment that people who tend to follow populists or who go kind of go fanatical about things, you know, it tends to come with a certain blindness, or very much a blindness. Now, it was interesting, my feelings and the conversations I've had since the killing of George Floyd has again kind of brought racism is a cumulative experience, as far as being the victim of having been the victim of racism. That is that every time I'm in a situation where I feel my race is being used against me, or I'm being oppressed because of my race, it brings back the memories of every other time that it has happened, big or small. It could be, you know, it could be somebody giving me just a certain look that I recognize on the bus, you know, a look that I recognize, like, it's not necessarily because I'm black or brown, but it's because I'm other, or because I'm suspicious or a suspect in their eyes. And even a small little look like that can just remind me of the times when it was name calling, or being chased through town by skinheads, or, you know, or times when my father and I have had racist words thrown at us on the streets, you know. And even to the point as looking at one of these videos of which there are many now, of the killing of Black people, also brings back and taps into that, to my cumulative experience. It's almost like a collective ocean of accumulated experiences over the course of time, where racism has existed in the modern sense of the word. All right. The questions, I think there's one from Taddy Callis. I'm not sure it's a question, but I picked up the book last night to finish it. And as a break from the Republican convention, when I got to that part, it felt like a gut punch. But Taddy also continues, I loved your book though, thank you. So I'm not sure exactly what felt like a gut punch, but I'm happy you loved the book.
Does anyone have a question?
Okay, Taddy's clarifying here. The part about Trump, it felt like a gut punch. Well, yeah, you know, to me or anyone who looks like me, not anyone obviously, but to most of us, and to so many humans in the United States and around the world, I think I speak for a lot of people, the existence of a political person like Trump and a person with so much power, being the way that he is kind of a gut punch every day. I would say it's traumatizing, and it's traumatizing to a point where I feel like there's just two ways to go about it. It's try to ignore it as much as possible and look at you know, positive aspects, and then to kind of just try to laugh and see the humor in what's going on. Anyway, I don't want to derail too much into that.
I think we had a hand raised. Dog, did you have your hand raised? Okay.
Yeah, you guys can unmute to ask questions too if you want, if that's okay with you, Lisa.
Yeah, I have unmuted Dog.
Yes. Hello, Jason. Thank you so much for this presentation and for your book. I'm talking to you from Kungsholmen in Stockholm.
Right, we're not far
yes.
from each other.
No,
I'm
we're
on
not.
Södermalm.
Okay, just across the water, across Riddarfjärden. Yep. There's been a lot of discussion, as you know, in Sweden, a lot of interest in Sweden in what is going on in the United States. There always is, but in recent months, of course, the racial situation in the US, the killing of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, etc., has attracted an enormous attention here. And I was just wondering if you could say something on how you see that and how you see the Swedish interest in the racial struggle in the United States. And do you think Swedes, what are the misunderstandings or part understandings, or what is it that Sweden can take away? What are the lessons of American racial struggles for Sweden? I mean, these are two different countries with two very different histories there. I was wondering if you have any synpunkter on that.
I definitely do, Dog, and thank you so much for being here all the way from Kungsholmen via Agastana. I think that for myself and for a lot of Black, Indigenous, and persons of color in Sweden, and what's going on in the United States brings to mind, again, this cumulated experience of racism. I don't know any person of color who hasn't experienced racism at one point or another in their lives, here in Sweden, or in Norway, or in Denmark, or in the United States, or Germany, or I mean, I've been also having this conversation with people for the most part of my life. Because one thing we often need to do is not only to commiserate, but empower each other and to speak to each other about it, to be able to help each other. Systemic racism is not it doesn't know any national borders. Systemic racism is just that, it's systemic. It's built into the global market economy and has been for the past 4 centuries at least. It is very much something that is in in the culture that we all are raised on, even in Sweden, raised on the stereotyping of Black and brown people, just as it is gender issues. Gender issues don't know, and gender discrimination and gender oppression doesn't know national borders either. It's something that happens in England, in Mali, in the United States and Sweden in slightly different ways, but it all stems from the same thing. And thus it is with racism. And let's not forget the cultural impact that African-American, or the impact that African-American culture has had on the 20th century and beyond. African-American voices and fashion and language has basically been the foundation of global pop culture. I mean, definitely when it comes to music, very much in sports, and very much in the way we dress. So a lot of people a lot of people of color also identify with African-American culture, it being such a huge global force, and us being raised on it, not just Black and brown Swedes, but also white Swedes. And so it's part empathizing and sympathizing for what specifically is happening to African Americans specifically, and what tends to the exact oppression that's going on and has been going on since the founding of the United States. But then it quickly brings to mind, well, what is the situation like for me? What has been in Sweden? What has it been like for my father? Not ever being able to get a job, even though he has 2 PhDs, or constantly being offered a lower salary job than his white counterparts, even though he's better educated, to the racism that my mother experienced just for having a brown child and a Black husband at the time when they first got here, to all the times I've been stopped by the police for no reason other than just driving a car, or been racially profiled by the police on the street or on the train, or entering the country. So systemic racism truly is a global problem and phenomenon, and that's why I think it energized the Swedish, the part of the Swedish population that felt strongly about anti-racism, to the point that 8,000 people demonstrated in Stockholm, even though the pandemic going on. So part to show solidarity, but also to express anger and sorrow over the experiences that they and their families have had in this country. So I think, any moment of crisis is an excellent moment for introspection on an individual level, but also on the collective level. And any crisis is also an opportunity to choose a slightly better path to avoid this happening again. And again, I think the, killing of George Floyd, just as the COVID pandemic, are excellent moments for us to, as nations, as communities, as individuals, to reflect on how we're living our lives and how we could live our lives in slightly different ways. And a lot of people are hoping to engage Swedish culture in this conversation so that we can move the needle, so that we can actually improve and progress when it comes to particularly issues on race, for example. Sweden has made amazing inroads when it comes to gender equality, which to me is very important and very invigorating and inspiring, because once you do that, is the question of gender equality and the question of racial equality are branches of the same tree, rooted at the same base. So if we can make this progress when it comes to gender equality, then we already have a roadmap of sorts to doing it for racial equality. So in all, and in all the pain that the protests have meant and the killings have meant, I'm hoping that it's going to actually lead to a collective advancement and betterment of us all and how society functions in Sweden, in the United States, in the UK. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you for your question, Dog. And should we do a last one here from Chris Fredrickson? Or yeah, it's more of a comment. I found it fascinating that your dad had experienced being a person of color on 3 different continents. Yes. So my dad is born in Harlem. His mother is a Pan-Africanist and sends my father and his 3 siblings to live in Nigeria in the 50s. So my dad lives in Nigeria, and then before finally being able to get back to the United States, and then decides to migrate to Sweden, the continents that Chris is referring to. Yeah, it truly, you know, however painful it was for my father to be kind of uprooted from, you know, to leave his dad and to have to go to this very distant place, Nigeria. I also think that's what opened his eyes to the possibility later in life to look beyond New York City, look beyond Harlem, look beyond the borders of the United States, and actually understand Sweden as a possibility for him to be able to achieve one of his dreams, which was getting an education. You know, my father always told me, you know, you're born in Sweden, you have free healthcare and free education, you know, don't look the gift horse in the mouth, you know, get an education, that it's something they can't go away from you. And then of course I drop out of university because I want to make hip hop music and practice, you know, what he deems as street culture from those same very streets that he left. You know, his mind was spinning for years, literally. And I think he's landed in a good place with it, you know, seeing that I actually carry some of the torches that he carried while he was still working, and that I've used music as kind of a vehicle for things that even he deems as important. So I like to think I've made him proud. I think I have.
Well, Jason, I want to be respectful of your time, and we're coming up to the end here. I didn't know.
If anyone has a last question, I'll be open for that. But
oh, Adam, I've unmuted you. There.
Good. I might as well take the opportunity. I'm not that far away either. I'm in Årsta in Stockholm, which might
okay.
be
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
So we're two.
I figured as much, Autumn.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for a great talk and Q&A. So I mean, you mentioned at the very. I should say though, I've only read the Swedish version of the book yet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So this question also goes to the sort of translation question actually. You mentioned in the very beginning of your talk that this is a very American story, and I mean that's really true. I agree with that, but in a way, isn't it also a very Swedish story? You know, and that's also what makes it such an important book, I think, in the Swedish language, because it addresses this question that you posed in the first section that you read from too, which is that, you know, can't you have many origins, many homelands? And so that question is very. It might be even more important when it's posted in Swedish than in English for an American audience. Would you, I mean, so my question is really, how would you sort of read the book as a Swedish story, and how does that sort of Swedish story, you know, work when it's in English for an American audience? I mean, do you see that sort of as coming through, that sort of, that message?
I don't really presume to know exactly what American, British, Nigerian, or any other English-speaking readers take away from it. Hopefully, for a lot of readers, it'll be a rare insight into an aspect and part of Swedish culture that they may not be familiar with and may not have given much thought to at all. But I totally agree with you, Adam. For me, that was one of the aspects why I felt writing this book was important for Sweden. Just that the fact that Sweden, from the time when I was born to where we are today, has really gone from being more or less a homogenous culture to a very multicultural place. And that has been a, not a frictionless and isn't a frictionless journey in any way, which is totally natural. But I wanted to write it as a statement and a kind of a piece of evidence that, we are here, and a Swede can be many things. A Swede is not always what Swedes themselves presume a Swede is or assume a Swede is. To kind of just the perspective of who we are as Swedes and who we share our national identity with. Now, putting that in an American context, maybe, or my hope for the book is that it like I was saying before, that it can offer a slightly new take on a very well-known part of American history, i.e. The legacy of slavery, of the system of slavery, and how that legacy is carried through a particular family. And then via Sweden, given this other perspective on the United States. And I lived in New York for a couple of years. I wrote most of the book in New York, actually. And, living in this massive city, New York is truly diverse unto itself. And you get totally absorbed by this megalithic city, and I think in a lot of ways, the United States is such a dominant force in economy, in sports and entertainment, and globally, that I would also like to offer America. I mean, many nations around the world look to America. Today, maybe more in horror than in admiration, but at the same time, still, that no matter how bad a president is or how, outrageous, obviously outrageous the politics can get, we still look at it in just wonder and awe, for all the, amazingly beautiful parts of culture coming out of the United States. But having said that, I also think there are lessons that the United States could look to other countries for and be inspired by, even a small, seemingly insignificant country like Sweden. And of course, these things aren't directly translatable, but there are things that Sweden has managed to do in its building of a society that I think I would imagine and I would hope would inspire future American leaders more, So having said that, just a window for Swedes to look at another Sweden, but also a family that looks different in their eyes, ends up in the same town, in the same school, in the same neighborhood as they do. And for Americans, a glimpse into this a small speck of a country on the other side of the map, and some of the wonderful things that exist here, and also some of the similar and troubling things that exist here. So yeah.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining us. This was a great conversation.
Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you, Lisa, for having me. Thank you to the Swenson Center, and thank all of you for sitting in and for taking interest in my book, A Drop of Midnight.
Yes, and everyone can go to, what is it, adropofmidnight.com to buy your book?
Adropofmidnight.com has the book. I also turned it into a stage performance.
Okay. Is that also the website, or is that coming out?
The story of the book. It's also, it was supposed to premiere in New York City on March 30th. That didn't happen for obvious reasons. It got pushed back to October, which at the time felt very far away. And by then, everything will be solved. Now it will be premiering in Harlem in October next year. So that's how it looks today. I remain hopeful that it will actually happen. We were set to take it on tour to Minneapolis, to Chicago, to San Francisco and Seattle, to all the kind of pockets of Swedish Americans around the United States. So I remain hopeful that that will one day happen. And yeah.
Well, if you want to come to Rock Island, Illinois, let me know.
I would love to. I would love to. I tell you, at this point, I need to go there because I've been walking my own footprint, as we all have been walking in our own footsteps for very long here. I'm really longing to travel again.
Yes, I understand. Well, thank you. And for the rest of you book club folks, our next book is on the website, so don't forget to join us for that. All right.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good day.